Hi everybody, welcome to Chapter 7, which is Self-Esteem and Moral Identity. This chapter is going to go over strategies for building self-esteem in young children. A lot of what I'm going to talk about here today really is theory that you're probably going to see on the midterm, on exam number 2. You're probably also going to see this on the PECT exam as well, so I want you to keep that in mind. This is definitely a chapter that I would revisit, and I would take a look at the notes. I think out of all the chapters in this block, this is the one where there's a lot of stuff that we can actually take from and you can use, and you're definitely going to see as you're going into early childhood in your upper classes. So when we identify the self, you're going to look at, if you remember from Ed Psych, you looked at Freud and you did the id and the ego and the superego. Well, we kind of take that and break it down into more child development terms when we look at the parts of the self. When we do that and we look at the emotional and social development of a child, we're looking at self-awareness, self-concept, self-control, and self-esteem. So we're going to talk about each one of these a little bit. Basically, big thing I want you to be able to do is distinguish between the 4 of them, because that's the type of questions you'd see on the PECT. So if you can do that, then I think we're pretty good. So self-awareness is when a child views himself different or separate than others. So they know that they can make something happen. They really understand that, if I cry, I'm going to get my mom's attention. Honestly, I think of self-awareness as a child's ability to manipulate the situation. It really develops during infancy and toddlerhood, and they realize they can get what they want. And that's one of the reasons why we have this class, because we're kind of setting goals and setting limits for kids. So it's kind of one of the reasons why we have this class. Self-concept is what a kid thinks of themselves. Remember what I've said throughout this course. To develop a child emotionally and socially, we give them opportunities that they normally would not get early on in their academic career, basically in kindergarten, 1st grade, and 2nd grade, by giving them opportunities where they can be successful at all times. The reason we do that is so it helps them develop a self-concept and not be scared to try things. The example that the book gives, if a girl believes she can run fast, she's likely to try to run and enter a race. It's why we do what we do, and it's why we have this concept of self-concept, the concept of self-concept, where we look at a child from that perspective. Okay, so self-control. The book says anybody can develop it, but here's my belief: you do what you want with Lucimina's belief. My belief is that there are children that have different environments, and I'm big on Bronfenbrenner. I believe that all of the systems really impact how a child is and how a child believes. So I think that different factors impact a child's ability to have self-control. And you as the teacher, you're kind of stuck with whatever the kid brings from those external environments. If they have a bad environment at home, if they have a bad environment in the community, if they know how to get what they want and they can manipulate appropriately, they're not going to have good self-control. If they come from an environment where stuff that they want or need isn't readily available, and then they see people who get it, that's going to impact self-control as well. So, some kids can put off gratification until later, and some have frustration. This is why, I say this all the time, God bless kindergarten teachers, because they're the ones that really have to deal with the kid that's coming from the home environment that hasn't been cultured on what schooling is. I always put my best in kindergarten. That's why I did what I did when I was an administrator. I wanted my best in kindergarten, because things like self-control, kids just don't have it, and it is what it is. So, self-esteem, this is simple. I mean, this is basically what a child knows about themselves and what they think about themselves. You as the teacher, you have to do this. You have to help them build their worth. It's another thing like self-control where you kind of have influence, but I think that self-control really is more in the hand of you as the teacher, but self-esteem, a lot of that comes from the parents, comes from the family, because that's who's going to tell them what they need to do and what they're supposed to do. Self-esteem differs. Think about your own parents. Did they have higher expectations or different expectations from you than what you're doing? My father was a business owner, a bar owner, and a nightclub owner. He was not too thrilled with me going to college, and you know, he expressed that to me at 17. 17 years later, here I am. I have a full-time position at, you know, an elite school, plus I get to teach classes that I'm very passionate about for an institution that I care about and I support in Butler County Community College, because, you know, I love the community college environment and I value it. You know, my dad, his concept and, you know, his demands for success for me would have been me taking over his barn, his nightclub on the south side. I didn't do that. But, you know, we all have these different backgrounds and beliefs, and I think that helps us build our self-esteem. So self-esteem really, really develops in a social context, and it honestly develops between the relationship the adult has with the child. How a kid interacts with others and how you make them feel is everything. And I can't stress that enough to you guys who are going to be working with, you know, working with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. My passion has always been 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. I realize our certification has changed now from birth to 4th grade, but you know, for me, it was always getting those children in kindergarten, making them feel good about themselves, because we can really set it up as the building blocks for 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. Those of you that are working with toddlers, you know that you really need to help them develop self-esteem through their interactions with others, which I think is more difficult to facilitate interaction with others at that age than it is in kindergarten. So how do you influence a child's self-esteem? The book pulled this. I actually think this is pretty, I think this is pretty cool. I like this things to say to a child to help with their self-esteem. You have lots of friends. This class works well on projects together. That was a funny joke. It was thoughtful of you to be quiet and whisper your question to me while everybody was still napping. This is also that idea, you know, where you say, I like the way that Amy walked up in front of the class and sat down in front of the mats and had her ears ready to listen and her hands folded. By doing that, it makes the other children do it, and it makes them want to please. We all want to please everybody. I want to please you. I want you to have a good class experience. You do your assignments, you want to please me. So that's kind of how that works. So that's ways that we can influence a child's self-esteem. Ways not to, just some examples on this. You know, you don't want to say things that can be unmotivating and negative to a child. Don't tell them to grow up. Don't tell them they're lazy. Don't say no wonder nobody likes you. I mean, if you're doing this and you're saying any of these things, you have no business in education in the first place, but I put the slide in there anyway. You'll remember, all of you will remember a time in your childhood where an adult made you feel bad about yourself. I'll give you my example that, you know, mind you, this was 1980. God, that would have been 1st grade for me, so like 80, 85, 86. If you remember this, and those of you that are slightly older or close to my age will definitely remember this. You remember in the 80s and 70s when if you wrote with your left hand, you were wicked, especially if you were coming from a Catholic background. Well, I'm Catholic, and when I went to CCD, I had an old nun who used to just smack me for writing with my left hand, and that really hurt my self-esteem because I was getting 2 different perspectives on it. I got one when I was home, and I got one, actually 3. Home, it was fine. School, it was fine. But CCD, you know, I was called wicked by this woman, and it confused me, and I still remember it to this day. So, I mean, that was an adult that made me feel bad about myself, and nobody bothered to stop it. So, you know, I'm sure all of you have at least one thing that you remember that's similar. Bullying, you know, we're going to talk about bullying and cyberbullying a little bit more in this course. You know, it's a person will hurt somebody else physically or verbally. We're finding now in 2015 is, you know, as crazy as it is, that it's the verbal that's hurting children more. Kids are more resilient to physical bullying than they are verbal bullying, which to me is very interesting. So, you know, we have other different ways to bully children. That, you know, we need to as adults see what's happening and be able to facilitate and control it. When we talk about cyberbullying, I'm going to go with whatever the legal implications with it that, you know, some people don't like saying, but remember, I'm coming at you guys from a former administrator perspective, and I think that's important because I don't want any of you to get in trouble, and that's pretty big for me, but I want you to be able to help children because that's kind of what your goal is, and you do that through conversations with the principal, conversations with the guidance counselor, if you're in an early learning center, conversations with the center director, and separation and isolation of children if nothing works. So moral identity is your Kohlberg theory. This is basically saying, children that are actually acting in moral ways, and that they understand the difference between right and wrong. Would you interfere if a child was messing somebody else's work up? Would you let it go? Does the child understand right or wrong? Who is this linked to? This is linked to Kohlberg and Coles. Once again, I'm going to tell you guys when you see stuff that is heck-worthy, that's going to be on the early childhood exam that you all have to take for certification years from now, but there are names you got to remember. This name is one that you got to remember, Lawrence Kohlberg. He had 6 stages of moral development. He believed each one was different than the others. Coles was more, you're going to see him more in ed psych, because he was really interested in when children had resiliency over stressful situations. You probably won't see him much more after this class, but Kohlberg had the 6 stages of moral development. You'll see that in ed psych. You'll probably see it in intro to ed, and you're definitely going to see it in your advanced child development classes. Dewey also said that moral identity came out of culture and it came out of experiences. This is why Dewey believed in this notion of progressive education, where we all had our own perceptions of education, and we lived our own lives and we did what we were supposed to do. Children had moral understanding by working and learning with others in school, and that's kind of just what happened. So how do we have kids develop authentic self-esteem? You do this through believing in them, being authoritative, which we said was one of the most important things. You have to have your appropriate activities, genuine interest in kids, meaningful feedback, encouragement, pleasant and unpleasant feelings, respect for all, and social skills. The last part of this chapter, I'm going to go over examples of how you can actually do this. Why do we say authoritative is what we should be doing? Really, honestly, it's because of these lines right here, reasonable limits. We want our children to be able to set limits appropriately, and that helps them develop positive self-esteem, and then that gives them a better chance of being healthy and performing appropriately. So cute activities help children develop self-esteem, give them the opportunity to make decisions. If they have responsibility, you're in charge of passing things out, you're in charge of making sure the garbage gets here, you're in charge of collecting milk money. When children have responsibility, this will help them develop a sense of right and wrong, and you need to start doing that as soon as you possibly can in an elementary school. Because if the teacher doesn't do it, and it's not really required by teachers to do this, but if the teacher doesn't do it, then we kind of see problems when they go into the higher grades. So adults have to have an active and genuine interest. This is something that really would annoy me when my research, I've told all of you guys this, my research really is on hiring practices of school administrators, basically how do we hire teachers, and my research interest is big on this, and I always try to pick up on the teacher candidates that come in and have no genuine interest in teaching and who are doing it for the wrong reason. Children pick up on it very quickly. I'm pretty good at picking up on it quickly, and that's bad for child self-esteem. And you have to show, you have to know when somebody's there for the right reason and when they care about kids. Feedback needs to be meaningful. I hate empty praise. If somebody says, good job, does nothing. Good job on raising your hand to speak. You're citing a specific example of what the child did. Good job on your test. You must have studied very hard for this. That's the type of feedback that is meaningful. It's not empty praise. It's crucial, and it helps build a kid's self-esteem. So I pretty much just said this. This is the notion of avoid that empty praise. You want the encouragement to be appropriate. So children have unpleasant feelings. As a teacher, you have to be on the look for those sort of behaviors. Remember, this class is talking about emotional and social development, and I'm talking about birth to grades 4. I'm telling you this, by grades 3 and 4, a lot of this has worked itself out, but you'll still see it. As the kindergarten teacher, the preschool teacher, the first grade teacher, you're bridging that gap between what the child is experiencing internally, what they learned at home, and then there's you in the middle. you're going to have kids that have pleasant and unpleasant feelings, and you're going to have to work with them and coach them. And I know that as a former school administrator that's very common. So try to keep that in mind and be on the lookout for any of these behaviors that could possibly cause issues. And that also relates to respect. What I call a normal family situation might be different than what others call a normal family situation. We have blended, mixed generation families, different people living in different households, and that's something that we've come to expect and we've come to learn about being, in the United States. So try to demonstrate respect for this. So give you an example of this. This is basically acknowledging that it exists, which is better than not acknowledging that it exists. So specific social skills need to be taught. Once again, I would hope if you're a 3rd or 4th grade teacher, you're not doing this. You are. God, I don't want to know what the 2nd and 1st grade teachers look like. But if you're in kindergarten, you got to be prepared to do this. You got to teach kids how to not hit when angry, how not to interrupt others, how not to respectfully join in a group. And honestly, if you end up in a school and you're the 3rd or 4th grade teacher and you're dealing with all this on a regular basis, you got to run. You got to find a different district because that can be a problem. Early learning centers, same thing. You want a culture of respect that's already built in, and you want to hope that the people have worked with children at a young age. When you get a new kid coming in, obviously that's certainly different. What can contribute to unhealthy self-esteem? Child abuse really is covered in EDUC 103, which is Children's Health and Safety. But basically the big idea that we tell you here is that can really have an impact on a kid's self-esteem. And if the kid doesn't, if there's no self-responsibility for a child where they don't know what the rules are, they don't know what their role as the child is, that can be a problem because the parent doesn't do what their responsibilities are, and then the school asks something different, and that can cause different challenges as well. Being critical of kids degrades them, and they remember it. Children have great memories, and something, all of you are watching this right now. I'm sure you can think of something from your childhood that scarred you. You got to be careful for this with kids because we all have those. When a child doesn't have a pleasant feeling, you need to help them. You need to help them understand what they're going through and what it is. Don't ignore kids. Make sure that every kid feels special and they feel like they belong. And don't show contempt for families or cultural groups. As somebody that's going into education, that's something that you should never do. And we hope that we're past this, but try to make sure that you have an open mindset, open classroom that really looks and respects the differences of others. So that's it. I think all of these are important concepts. If you have any questions on this, let me know. We're going to move on. We're going to talk a little bit more about stress, mental health, and that sort of thing moving forward. Thank you.